I hope you're having an amazing day. So today I'm going to talk about polymorphism. So before that, I would highly encourage you to register for an org if you haven't done so. So I've already logged into my org. And the first thing, I just wanted to tell you guys, I've noticed something new today. So if you look at this icon here, right, something like a triangular, there's something called in-app learning. I mean, maybe I'm not paying attention to it very much. So this is today I've noticed it, and I find it very interesting, right? So they've integrated the Trailhead to the platform itself, so which is pretty great. So yeah, check that out. Okay. So let's go to the developer console because that's exactly where the magic happens. Okay. So go to this gear cog icon here at the top right hand corner, and we'll take you to developer console. Okay. Now I'm here. Okay, in developer console. Now, polymorphism, right? Why do you need to know about polymorphism? What is polymorphism, right? Polymorphism, in simple terms, means one name, many forms. One name can acquire multiple forms, right? Now, it sounds like a science fiction, right? But it's not really the case, right? I'll explain it in a very simple way. So there are two kinds of polymorphism, which you should be aware of. One is the static, another one is the dynamic, right? So today we're going to deal with static polymorphism. Because in dynamic, you need to understand a little bit of inheritance, virtual, and stuff, right? It's getting a little bit trickier, but today I just wanted to start with the basics, okay? The very simple one. So the static one, right? There, in some programming language, they also call as the concept of overloading, right? Now, I understand that it can sound a little bit overwhelming to you guys if you haven't heard about the term polymorphism before, but stay with me. I'll try to explain it in a very, very simple way. So first thing first, if you haven't watched my previous video in classes, I would highly encourage you to do so because it's very important you understand what are classes, what are objects, right, before we get into the complex aspect of object-oriented programming, okay? So now, in static polymorphism, right, its compiler lets you choose a function at or a method at a compile time, right? So you might be thinking, what the heck this guy talking about, right? So let me give you a very example, okay? Let me create two methods here, then it will get more clear. So we are dealing with this car class, right? And I wanted to measure the distance traveled, okay? So if you remember your high school, physics, distance equals to speed times time, right? Very simple, okay? So I'm going to create a method here, very simple method, okay? And I'm expecting an integer return type. So if you remember in my last episode, I talked about when you deal with any sort of a method, right? So you can either specify return type. So in our case, in the first case, right? As you can see, we have a display info, which contains void, which means that it's not expecting any return values, right? But if we specify something like integer here, right? Say calculate distance, it expects something in return, means it expects return an integer value, right? So just an example, this will work, right? Let me save it, because what happens is you're telling a compiler, right, or a code that, look, this is the method, right, I'm interested into, I'm defining it, and I want the return type to be an integer, right? This is an integer here. So, and you use the return keyword to return, in this case, a 0, which is of integer, right? Now, for some reason, for whatever reason, if you did a typo or you put a decimal here, right, it will not work because integers are not decimals, right? Both are different data types, okay? So it will give you an error saying that, look, I'm expecting an integer return type, and instead you're passing a decimal. It doesn't work, right? So that's the thing, okay? So I'll keep it back. Now, methods do accept params, right? In other words, I'll show you what I mean by that. See, as you can see, there's a bracket here, right? In between, you can pass the param of values that needs to be passed, right? for instance, is similar like a constructor I defined, right? You see, I have a params here, right? The same way you can do to a method. Okay, let's say I wanted to pass integer, right? And I want to pass speed, right? And let's say I'm putting everything in integer, right? Just to keep it very simple. I don't want it to go to the date conversion and kind of stuff, okay? TMS, that's time, second, whatever, okay? Let's say it's in the time, it's hourly based, okay? Time in hour, okay? So you can put 1 hour, 2 hours, okay? So return, so what are you returning? So we have to calculate the distance. Distance equals to speed, time, it's time, right? So you're gonna see it's speed, okay, time, TMH, okay? Let me save it. So this will work, right? Because you're passing speed. Okay, now, let's say you're not interested in integer value. You're still interested in calculating the distance, but you're saying, look, I wanted to have a result in the form of a decimal, right? Because I'm not interested to know, say, for instance, this will return, let's say, a speed like, sorry, distance like, 100 miles an hour or 100 kilometers an hour, depending upon which part of the world you're from, right? Let's say, no, that's the speed. My apologies. The distance traveled, right? So that will be like, say, 1,000 kilometers, right? Or 1,000 miles, okay? Now, let's say you wanted to know more accurate, like you wanted to say 1,000.56 miles, right? The distance, total distance traveled, right? So that you can file for your, expense claim, right? Whatever, okay? So, I mean, I know that it's a very bad example, but I'm trying to make it very simple, right? I don't want it to complicate it. I mean, you can do a lot of complex, like you can pass as subjects and other stuff, but that's not the point. Point is to just to, get the message out, to explain to you the concept of static polymorphism, right? So in this case, it will return in an integer form. It will return 1,000, say probably 2,000, or probably 3,000, okay? Let's say I have a requirement where I wanted to return in the form of, like, say, 3,000.56, okay? This is my requirement. So if I use this method, right, it will not do the job for me because it will only give me an integer value, okay? Now, you might be tempted to say, okay, let me modify this code to do the job for me. That is exactly a very, very bad practice because you might break an existing code which might be used somewhere else. So please remember one thing. In programming, do not modify a code unless you really have to, right? That's a very bad practice because you might break something if you're modifying an existing code, right? Code should not be open for modification, but should be open for extension. That's a part of a solid principle, which is very important for you guys to understand, but not now, but I'm just saying. So keeping that into consideration, right? So I don't want the calculate distance to be touched whatsoever because I don't want this code to be modified. Now, but I wanted to use the same method, okay? So what I can do, I can create another one. So let me copy this. Okay, and here I'm gonna pass, decimal. Pass decimal. Right, let me save it. Okay, now I got my job done, right? So I got two methods here, right? It exactly looks the same, right? Have the same naming convention here, same name here, right? Calculate distance, right? This is something what we call as overloading, right? Because you are using the same method name but different params, right? And different return values as well, okay? So this is something what we call as a static polymorphism. The reason why it is called static polymorphism is your compiler or your code will let you choose your method at compile time, okay? So let me run this code, okay? This is a very simple concept, right? Static polymorphism, because at times in your programming journey, you might have to make a similar kind of, something similar, right? And so I have done that in the past. Like for instance, there's an example, right? You have to get an address, right? So you pass a different objects, right? Sometimes you get an address from a contact, or sometimes you get an object from a custom object. So you pass the same name at times, right? And because I don't want to break a code which is used somewhere else, right? So so you do overloading concept there. Okay, so in simple terms, I repeat it again. So this is a form of static polymorphism. So static polymorphism is your compiler, right? So this, or your code, whichever way you understand it. Okay, we're not here for fancy jargons, but I'm just saying. So your code will let you choose a method at the compile time, right? So let's say I wanted to run. Okay, let me copy. So let me create this car class. Okay, car class. C object new car class. So you have to pass the name. Let's say RD. So I'm passing the name, like you can see, constructor here, right? Model number, you just put whatever you want. Number of doors, you can put 4. Okay. Now you have C object. Okay. Now I want to have a distance, so total distance covered in a form of an integer, right? So what do you do normally? Integer, right? So you can say distance, okay, total distance. So you can say C object, okay, dot. So sometimes IntelliSense doesn't work, which really annoys me, but it's all right. I do use Visual Studio Code most of the time, but it's convenient to use Developer Console. So okay, so I'm going to pass the distance in speed as 100k, 100 miles an hour in the case, and the time you can say 2 hours. Okay, so if you run this, okay, let me see the output, and you can get the distance. Okay, and let's see the distance. Okay, 200. Now let's say I'm interested to see the result in the form of a decimal, right? Not just in the form of a integer, right? So if I do this, right, 100.2, let me copy the code again here. Let's say you decide to do this, okay, and so I wanted to do this 100.2. Okay, do you think this part of the code will work, or so think about it. Pause the video for a second and think about it. Can I do this? Because I'm passing a decimal to this, this method, right? Which is pretty much correct because it does accept decimal, right? Because that's why we created it. But will this part of code execute in the right way, or will it throw an error? So let's find out. So let me comment this piece of the code here. So remember this is something what we call as overloading, right? You might hear this overloading term a lot. If you're someone, if you talk to a Java developer, this is, they will tell you what overloading is. If you talk to a C# developer, the concept is pretty much similar, right? It is a part of a static polymorphism, right? So we do execute here. So illegal assignment, because you are actually trying to assign a integer to a decimal. This is what I said. The compiler, you have to choose a right method at the compile time, right? Because it will not decide the right method at the runtime. I will show you what I meant by that when I talk about runtime in my next episode, which is very interesting because we will talk about inheritance and other kind of stuff, okay? So in this case, right, you have to change the data type to decimal, okay? Otherwise it won't work. So this is exactly why the compiler is forcing you to choose the right definition or right method at the compile time, right? Based on an error you got, right? So let's see here. See, there you go. So this is exactly what I was talking about, static polymorphism. In dynamic polymorphism, it would have worked, right? If you would have done something like this, it would have worked, but it's entirely a different concept, right? We will talk about it because you need to understand the concept of inheritance, and we'll talk about the virtual method and override, just to give you a glimpse, right? What I'm going to talk about it. It's very important, right? Because the thing is, you can't use Apex in a form of a procedural programming language. That will be a very bad use of programming language, right? Because Apex is an object-oriented programming. You need to understand when to use overloading, when to use overriding, when to use which objects, right? So you have to understand object-oriented program. Otherwise, it defeats the whole purpose. You know, if you're just merely using if-else, those are important, right? If-else, while loops, they are important. They play a very significant role. But you need to understand how to create a class, how to how to create a right class, when to inherit, when not to inherit, right? Because this is a very important concept. So I'll try my best to explain to you in a very simple way, right? Because I have a lot of experience working in different programming languages. So that's one of my, that's one I would say I'm grateful for all, to all the opportunities I got in my life to work, starting from C, C++, a bit of Delphi, C#, right? And then, I still do some C# work. So yeah, so I'll try my best to explain to you guys in a very simple way. I understand that this course is especially for admins, and with an assumption that you guys have never programmed before. That's fine. You're exactly in the right place to learn. And once you finish this course, I'm optimistic that you guys will be able to start write some part of a code, some Apex code, and it does need a lot of experience and practice, right? Because I won't make you an awesome Apex developer by this course. I'm afraid to say that, because you need to put a lot of practice, and it comes with a lot of experience, right? So, but what I can do for you is just to give you a head start, right? To make you guys feel more confident on the space of programming, right? So that you don't get overwhelmed when you look at a developer code. You can easily read their code, right? And make small amendments, right? When the developer is not around. So that's exactly what my main intention is, to give you guys that confidence, right? In Apex space, okay? Right. So this is exactly what I wanted to talk about today. Static polymorphism, as you can see that. I repeat what I covered. We talked about polymorphism, right? Polymorphism, as I said, right? Polymorphism in simple terms means one name, many forms, right? There are two kinds of it. One is dynamic, one is the static, right? We talked about the static today, right? Where we explained the concept of overloading, where I've explained to you how to create two methods, similar name, but different params, right? And as well as the different return types, okay? Now, we try to use the same names for same data type. What I mean by that is that in first case, right, I've used integer as a return type, right? In the second case, I've used decimal as a return type, but I was trying to assign that to an integer variable, right? So the compiler complained, saying, look, this is, or the code complained, right? Saying, look, you are making an illegal assignment, right? So you have to choose the right method at the compile time. That is what a static polymorphism is all about, right? That being said, I hope you guys learned something from today's episode. If you have any sort of doubts or questions, please put any questions you have in the comment below. Look, there is no such thing called silly questions, right? When I started a program, I used to ask so much of questions, right? Because that's how you learn, right? Go for it. Ask as many questions you want. I'll try to answer it whenever I can, right? I won't promise that I'll be jumping on it straight away, because, I still got a lot of stuff to do. But that being said, I will try my best to answer you guys, okay? So you guys have a great Sunday. Take care.